still wake up some nights because of a sound I wish I had never heard. At first, I always think it's coming from outside my window. Just slow chewing. Not loud, not frantic. Just steady. Like something is taking its time. I've checked outside more times than I can count. There's never anyone there. No animals, no people, nothing. But every time I hear it, I'm taken right back to the weekend that changed everything. It happened 3 years ago, and I still don't know what followed us home. It all started with what seemed like an ordinary camping trip. My cousin David loved exploring places most people ignored. One afternoon, he sent me a link to an old hiking forum. The photos looked beautiful. Tall trees, quiet trails, hardly any visitors. But every review ended with the same strange sentence. Leave before sunset. Nobody explained why. David laughed and said people were just trying to make the place sound mysterious. Honestly, I agreed with him. By noon the next day, we were already driving there. I remember joking that we'd probably come home with nothing more than mosquito bites. I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment we arrived, something already felt different. There wasn't another car in the parking lot. Not one. The information board near the trail had faded so badly that most of the writing had disappeared. Several trail markers were missing. It looked like nobody had taken care of the place in years. The forest itself seemed normal. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt like we were standing somewhere people had quietly decided to stop visiting. David didn't seem bothered. He grabbed his camera and started taking pictures. I just adjusted my backpack and followed him. The hike itself should have been peaceful. Instead, it only made me more uncomfortable. The trail wasn't difficult, but something about the forest felt off. There were birds, I could hear insects, even the wind moved through the trees. Yet somehow every sound felt distant, like we were hearing the forest through a closed door. David finally looked over at me. He smiled. Then he said, "It feels like the woods don't want us here." I laughed, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. But after he said that, neither of us talked very much. Eventually, we reached a small clearing beside a stream. The campsite looked almost perfect. There was a narrow stream running beside it. The water looked unbelievably clear. But no matter where I stood, I couldn't see the bottom, even where it should have been shallow. I remember staring into the water for several seconds. It wasn't moving strangely. It wasn't dirty. It just refused to show what was underneath. David shrugged it off. We unpacked our gear, pitched the tents, and started collecting firewood. Looking back, that stream was probably the first real warning. As evening arrived, I found something that made even David stop joking. I was gathering firewood when I noticed something nailed to one of the trees. It was an old wooden sign. Most of the paint had peeled away. Only a few words were still readable. "Do not feed the forest." I remember staring at it for a moment. I tried convincing myself it was probably an environmental warning. Maybe people had been feeding wildlife. David walked over, laughed quietly, and took a picture. He said he liked collecting strange things like that. Neither of us knew that would be the last normal photograph he ever took. The sun kept dropping, and with it, the temperature. That's when the forest began to change. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the air had changed. Not the kind of cool evening you'd expect in the woods. This was different. It felt heavy, cold enough to make my hands ache. I zipped up my jacket and looked around. The wind had stopped. The trees barely moved. Even the stream sounded quieter than before. David rubbed his arms and forced a smile. That's weird. It was the first time all day that he sounded unsure, and for some reason, that unsettled me more than the cold. A few minutes later, something happened that neither of us could explain. We were sitting by the fire when something landed beside us. A soft thud. I looked down. There was a bright red apple lying on the ground. Fresh, perfect, almost polished. Neither of us had packed apples. I looked up into the trees. Nothing. No movement, no branches shaking. David picked it up and turned it over in his hands. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Then he called into the woods. "Nice joke!" Nobody answered. Then another apple appeared, and after that, everything changed. Another apple dropped behind us. Then another somewhere off to the left. None of them fell through branches. They just appeared. David stopped smiling. So did I. Then we heard it. Chewing. Slow. Heavy. Like someone eating with complete patience. The sound wasn't coming from one place. It seemed to move around us. Left. Right. Behind us. Then, all at once, it stopped. The silence afterward somehow felt even worse. Neither of us slept very much that night. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up. Something had touched the side of my tent. Not scratching, not pushing, just sliding across the fabric. I held my breath. The sound lasted only a few seconds. Then it was gone. I whispered David's name. No answer. I told myself he was probably asleep. But when I looked toward his tent, the zipper was open. I stepped outside, expecting to find him nearby. Instead, I found something much worse. The campsite was empty. David's boots were still there. His backpack. His camera. Even his phone. Nothing had been taken. Except David. I called his name again and again. The forest gave me nothing back. Then, somewhere ahead, I heard it. That same slow chewing. It sounded close enough to follow. Looking back now, I wish I hadn't. I followed the sound deeper into the trees. My flashlight barely reached beyond the next few trees. Then, I saw them. Apples. Dozens of them. Scattered across the forest floor. Some looked untouched. Others had strange bite marks that didn't look human. The chewing stopped. Everything became completely still. Then, I heard David's voice. "Over here!" I looked up. Someone was standing between the trees. Same height, same jacket, same flashlight. He wasn't moving. He wasn't turning around. He was just waiting. I took one cautious step forward and immediately realized something was terribly wrong. I stood there, trying to convince myself it really was David. He was wearing the same jacket, holding the same flashlight, standing exactly the way he always did. But something felt wrong. I called his name one more time. "David?" For a second, Nothing happened. Then, his shoulders began to shake. Not like he was crying. More like he was trying not to laugh. Without turning around, he spoke. "You're closer." The words were quiet, calm, almost friendly. But every instinct I had told me not to take another step. I started backing away, and that's when reality stopped making sense. I took one slow step backward, then another. I never looked away from him. I couldn't. But somehow, the distance between us was shrinking. He never moved, not once. Yet every time I blinked, he seemed a little closer. I actually checked the ground behind me. I wanted proof that I was moving. I was. So why did it feel like he was catching up? That was the moment I stopped looking for a logical explanation. Then, something happened that I still can't explain. The flashlight hanging at his side suddenly clicked on. I never saw him touch it. The beam slowly lifted until it was pointing straight at me. The light was so bright I had to cover my eyes. Everything around me disappeared. The trees, the fog, even the ground beneath my feet. There was only that beam. And the feeling that something was watching me through it. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and ran. I ran without caring where the trail was anymore. Branches slapped against my jacket as I pushed through the trees. I wasn't trying to find the trail anymore. I just wanted to get away. Behind me, the chewing came back. Only this time, it wasn't just one sound. It was many. Slow, steady, all keeping the same rhythm. I never looked behind me. Maybe I was too afraid. Or maybe some part of me already knew I wouldn't like what I'd see. Just before sunrise, I finally reached the campsite. The fire had burned out. The campsite looked exactly the way we'd left it. And sitting beside the cold ashes was David. He looked tired. His clothes were damp, but he seemed strangely calm. He looked at me and simply said, "I got lost." That was it. No panic, no questions. When I asked where his flashlight was, he frowned. Then he quietly said, "I never took one." I didn't know what to say, because I knew what I'd seen. We left the forest that morning, but I don't think either of us truly left it behind. Over the next few weeks, David changed. He stopped answering calls. He quit his job. When I finally went to check on him, his apartment smelled like fresh fruit. The kitchen was covered with apples. On the table, the counters, even the floor. I asked him why he had so many. He stared at them for a long moment before looking back at me. Then he quietly said, "I don't remember buying them." I wanted to believe him, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't the same person who had gone into that forest with me. The last time I saw David, he asked me a question I'll never forget. I stood there, looking at someone who sounded like my cousin, but didn't feel like him anymore. He glanced down at one of the apples on the table. Then he looked back at me. There was a faint smile on his face. Not happy, not angry, just empty. He asked one question. "Do you ever hear it chewing?" I couldn't answer. I don't even remember leaving his apartment. I only remember the silence that followed me all the way home. 2 days later, David was gone. When the police entered his apartment, everything was exactly where it should have been. His wallet, his keys, his camera, his clothes. Nothing suggested he had packed up or walked away. The only thing missing was David. And every single apple. The officers searched for weeks. No witnesses, no leads. Eventually, the case went quiet. Everyone else moved on. I couldn't. Months passed before I looked at that old photograph again. I had almost forgotten about the picture David took that evening, the one of the old wooden sign. One night, I found it while scrolling through old photos. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it. At first, everything looked the same. The faded wood, the cracked paint, the warning we'd laughed about. Then, I noticed something I was sure hadn't been there before. The photograph had changed. Under the faded words, there was another sentence, perfectly clear, as if it had just been carved into the wood. It never eats alone. I stared at the screen for what felt like minutes. I zoomed in, zoomed out, compared it to the memory I had in my head. It didn't matter. That sentence hadn't been there before. At least, I'm certain it hadn't. From that day on, strange things started happening again. A few weeks later, I opened my front door before work. There was a single red apple sitting on the welcome mat. No note, no footprints, nothing. I threw it away without thinking much about it. The next morning, there was another one. Then, another. Every few weeks, the same thing happened. Always one apple, always fresh, and no camera ever showed anyone leaving it there. Then, the sound came back. Even now, years after that camping trip, some nights I wake up, listening. The house is completely still. The street outside is empty. Then, I hear it. Very faint. Very slow. Chewing. I don't look outside anymore. I don't go near forests. And I haven't been camping since that weekend. Sometimes, I wonder if whatever was waiting out there never wanted the forest at all. Maybe it was only waiting for someone to... Maybe it was only waiting for someone to bring it home. If you ever find yourself standing in a quiet forest and you come across an old warning no one can explain, you should probably listen to it.